think that's the big hope there, right? It's the big
Yes.
hope is that you don't
Yeah,
have to live
everybody
like
wants to
this entire
thrive. People don't want to just get by. People don't
Right.
just want to live. They want to live their best life.
Yeah. Good morning, Gabe Howard, but it's afternoon for you.
Yes, it's it's just afternoon for me, just by a few minutes.
Yeah, so you're in Ohio.
I am.
Columbus.
Columbus, yes. Yep, right smack in the middle of the state.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate your time because I was looking for somebody to talk about bipolar disorder and the experience of that. So I appreciate you've said I can ask you anything.
Anything.
Right?
I'm an open book.
My goal right now is to enlighten those of us that don't have bipolar, or maybe for people that have loved ones with bipolar about it. What would you like to see come out of this session?
I'd really like people to know that bipolar disorder is so much more than what people think of it as. We tend to think of it as highs and lows, right? It's right there in the name. So bipolar, either you're manic or you're depressed, and we tend to look at it in that really narrow window. But in
Right.
actuality, it's more of a spectrum. Right, suicidal depression is the lowest point, and godlike mania is its highest point, but it's also everything in between. So it's very possible for people with bipolar disorder to be in the middle, stereotypical, normal, average, doing well. And then, of course, they can become symptomatic and become depressed or become hypomanic or become manic. There's also a whole series of symptoms that can go along with it, like grandiosity and racing thoughts and hypersexuality. And all of these things sort of, coalesce and coexist with bipolar disorder, which make up a bipolar diagnosis. But in most people's brains, either you're manic, you're talking a mile a minute and you're the life of the party, quote unquote, but making really bad decisions, or you're depressed. And they think that those are the only two things. And in some rare cases, not only do they believe that those are the only two things, but that they're somehow split equally. Like 50% of the time you're manic and 50% of the time you're depressed. And that's not even true. So there's a lot of misunderstandings about the illness.
Can you define type 1 and type 2 bipolar disorder? I only learned this because of my time on a psychiatric unit, that there is a type 1 and a type 2.
Yeah, so bipolar 1 is all the way to godlike mania, all the way down to suicidal depression. Bipolar 2 is all the way to hypomania. So you never make that leap into godlike mania. You're hypomanic, all the way down to suicidal depression. Now, one is not more serious than the other. I've heard that before. Well, bipolar 2 isn't as serious as bipolar 1. And
Sure.
I suppose in a manner of speaking, bipolar 2 has less symptoms or less severe symptoms. So I suppose maybe, but I don't know. It's a bit like saying to somebody who has terminal cancer with 6 months to live and somebody with terminal cancer with a week to live, that your cancer is less severe. I mean, it seems like the suffering Olympics and it rings hollow. So I always like to break up that little, I don't think it's fair to call it less severe. It's just different. It has different symptomology.
Okay. Can you tell me, do we know the cause of bipolar disorder?
We don't. It's very random. I mean, we know what's not the cause, right? It's not bad parenting. It's not any of those things. It's just something that you're born with, and for some people it's triggered. For other people, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very complicated psychological disorder. But there's nothing that you can do to prevent it. You either have it or you don't, and then depending on how your life unfolds, determines how, I don't want to say how bad it is, but how it presents, etc. It's obviously going to present differently for different people depending on what your life is like.
I did some research because I was just curious. I'm a teacher. Like I'm not a psychology anything degree. So I was doing some research and I had read that there's a high correlation of trauma with bipolar and schizophrenia. Do you know anything about that?
So trauma has become really this buzzword, and it's really
Mhm.
popular right now. And it's difficult to say. I think that people who have bipolar disorder experience a lot of trauma. I think that's true, but the data is really mixed on trauma causing bipolar disorder.
Okay.
There's a it's sort of like saying, there's this stat out there that people with schizophrenia die 25 years younger than the rest of the population. Now, the stat is not untrue, but it's a little bit incomplete. For example, they just took all people with schizophrenia. Well, obviously, people with untreated schizophrenia who aren't getting the care that they need are obviously going to die younger.
Mm-hmm.
So they really needed to, of course, separate it out to people in recovery from schizophrenia, meaning people who receive, case management, treatment, supports, etc., and people who are untreated. Also, we notice in the schizophrenia population, there's unfortunately a lot of comorbidity,
Right.
smoking, alcoholism, obesity. All of those things will make your lifespan shorter as well. So, yes, the statement trauma and bipolar disorder kind of run in the same circles is absolutely certain. But some folks have taken it to mean, well, trauma causes bipolar disorder, and I don't really think that the jury is still very much out on that.
Mm-hmm.
But trauma can absolutely exacerbate bipolar disorder. So if you have bipolar disorder, trauma can certainly make bipolar disorder worse. And obviously, bipolar disorder itself can cause trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take an example of grandiosity. If you believe that you are the greatest thing to ever live and you mortgage your house or borrow against all of your credit cards to start that, once in a lifetime business that is going to be bigger than Amazon, but what you're actually selling are painted rocks. It's really easy to get taken advantage of. It's really easy to lose all of your money. Of course, if you lose all your money and you're forced into bankruptcy and you lose your house, all of these things can certainly cause a lot of trauma. People with
Right.
bipolar disorder don't always make the best decisions, and making bad decisions can certainly put you in a front and center spot to experience some bad times.
Yeah, I want to explore more of that after of what bipolar can do to people because I have a step cousin I'll talk about in a sec, but I actually want to hear about you. Like I haven't heard your story. So I know you are obviously the bipolar expert. I was just actually reading more about you to prepare for this and I didn't realize that you also are an advocate about substance use and have been open then about the substance use that came with it. So tell me your story.
I mean, it's always hard to wrap up a story quickly, but the things that I like to point out to people is that I didn't know that I had bipolar disorder, even though I had glaring symptoms of it. My family didn't know that I had bipolar disorder, even though I had glaring symptoms. They thought this was the teenage years. They thought this was boys will be boys. They thought this was hormones. They thought this was teenage angst, right? I was also born this way, so I thought about suicide as far back as I can remember, but I thought it was
Wow.
normal. I thought
Mhm.
everybody was thinking about suicide. I thought that was part of the human condition. That's the problem with being born this way. And as I really like to point out to people, this is a 2024 2025, and we don't have robust mental health education now. It's certainly much
Really?
better than it was, but I would not call it robust. I would call it, we're starting to discuss it a little bit. But back in the 80s, we didn't discuss it at all, and we sure as hell didn't discuss it in boys. I mean, we weren't even covering basic emotions. I grew up in the you throw like a girl and boys don't cry generation. So I just had all kinds of issues. I thought that I was just weak, or a jerk, or disobedient, or a bad kid. And all of those things carried into my adulthood. I didn't know anything was wrong. Just to fast forward a little bit, and finally I reached the point where I was going to end my own life. Before I was able to attempt, somebody noticed something was wrong and took me to the emergency room. The emergency room doctor realized that I was suicidal and delusional and depressed, admitted me to the psychiatric ward, where I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that began my 4-year epic journey, learning to treat and manage bipolar disorder.
Mhm.
From the time I was diagnosed to the time I reached recovery took 4 years. And I define recovery as spending more of my life living my life than I do managing bipolar disorder. So obviously there's a billion stories that I could share. I mean, we're covering decades of my life here, but the long and short of it is I didn't know I was sick, and that caused a lot of problems and a lot of needless suffering.
How old were you when there were first, like the first symptoms emerged?
really tracking it back, the first, I mean, arguably the first symptoms emerged, since birth. I mean, I remember thinking about suicide at 5 years old, and that's very abnormal.
Yeah.
But the first real bipolar disorder symptoms that we really, me and my family have sort of, kind of pinpointed in hindsight, because hindsight's always 2020, is probably around the ages of 11 or 12.
Okay.
Maybe 13. It's kind of hard to run together. I would stay up for days at a time, and then I would sleep for days at a time. My mother always called me her Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde child,
Okay.
which of course is a direct analogy for bipolar disorder. So my mom really saw this in me even younger, but we really started to notice in earnest that things were taking a turn, right around my teenage years, 11, 12, 13. It's really, really difficult to pinpoint because my parents really honestly thought that they were behavioral problems.
Mm.
So they weren't really marking these down like, oh, well, this is when Gabe had the
Right.
following symptom. And in their mind, it's, oh, Gabe is testing boundaries. Gabe is being a teenager. It didn't help that I'm their oldest child. So I was also their first child. So they had nothing to compare it to. And of course, whenever they would reach out to their friends and talk about the trouble they were having with Gabe, everybody would immediately say, well, teenagers, teenagers. Well, teenagers. So that
Yeah.
was really that was their understanding that I was just a teenager.
And back in the 80s, like it would be off your radar, completely
Oh,
off your radar.
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Mental illness was something that happened to other families. It's something that happened to bad families.
Yeah.
It's something that happened to people who, had parents who were alcoholics or who beat you or, were dismissive or
Hmm.
abusive in some way. And that's just so untrue. My family was none of those things. And, especially early on in my public advocacy, people were like, well, were your parents drunks? And no, did absentee father? No, it just, did your mom hit you? Maybe do some drugs? No, none of this happened. Like
Right.
we were a stereotypical blue collar middle class family in the 80s. My mom was a stay at home mom. My dad was an over the road truck driver. He drove a semi. He was a teamster. We sat down and ate dinner. We went on vacations. We lived in a house. I mean, I had all of the protective factors.
Hmm.
What we didn't have was education and knowledge. We thought we were safe because my parents were good, engaged people,
Right.
and good, engaged families isn't where mental illness comes from. So we
Totally.
weren't looking for it at all.
Yeah. And you said so it was 4 years from start to finish of what you said from diagnosis to
To
treatment.
recovery, yeah, yeah. I call it my 4-year epic battle against mental
Sure.
illness.
I work with, well, I worked because they closed my psych unit, but I worked with a man, Dr. Cam Karamatian, who's doing like really amazing research here on bipolar disorder. And he was telling me that global studies show it's normally 8 to 10 years for diagnosis, start of symptoms to actual diagnosing. Like global studies, anywhere from 8 to 10, which is a long time if you're
I,
struggling.
I can really see that because especially with the intermittent nature of it. And intermittent is my word. Like I
Sure.
want to be
Yeah.
very, very clear, but it's, things go poorly, right? You're symptomatic and you're having all these symptoms, but then your mood shifts and now you're fine. And you could be fine for a few weeks, for a few months. You could be fine for a year, and
Right.
then the symptoms come back. Well, you have trouble connecting those two symptoms, right? It's like, okay, well, I experienced some suicidality in January, and now here we are in November and I'm experiencing some suicidality. Well, you've
Mhm.
already forgot about the downtimes in January. It's
Right.
months later. You tend to think of each one of these things as an isolated incident that you got through once before, so you'll get through again. It's not until you really take a 30,000 foot viewpoint of it and you're like, wait a minute. Every few months I'm having these symptoms. This is a collection of symptoms. There's a problem here.
I don't know the stats on this. Do you know how often suicidal ideation coincides with untreated bipolar disorder?
I really don't. And
It's
honestly,
a
I,
lot,
I'm
right?
I'm sure that there's probably a stat out there, but
Hmm.
I have to say that some of these stats are very, very difficult to get because a lot of people don't realize what suicidal ideation is.
Hmm.
There's so many people who, even in my own speeches, I'll be talking and I'll give the definition of suicidal ideation, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, I have that," and I'm like, "Well, that's concerning." Like it is. I've always done that. I'm just used to
Mm.
it.
Wow.
Or people are like, "Well, everybody does that." I'm like, no, everybody doesn't do that. And then, of course, there's severity. If it pops in your head for a second and then instantly leaves and it's never causing you a problem, maybe it is a weird quirk. I
Sure.
would still say that you should probably, pay attention to it and get it checked out. But if you're dwelling on it for, minutes, hours, days, I mean, it can be really debilitating. So, that's the problem with these things. Not every single thing is created equal, but we tend to talk about them as if they're all the same.
Right. Okay. So I want to get into the experience of it because I feel that when we understand it better, we as a society respond better. And one of the things I want to do here is like, that we have more empathy and compassion and understanding. So that said, can you tell me for anybody struggling with bipolar, what is the hardest part of that on a day-to-day basis?
I it's so difficult to figure out what the hardest thing is. I mean, in some ways, I always wanted to answer the question. The hardest thing is whatever you're faced with in the moment,
Okay.
right? Because that's the thing that's causing you problems. I mean, the totality of it is deeply disturbing and difficult.
Hmm.
I really think that the hardest thing about it is that you're not in control of your own life. You're not in control of your own brain. Like
Right.
you want to be happy. I mean, I think about all of these times that I'm doing the thing that I want, right? I'm at the concert. I'm with the right people. I got the best seats. They're
Hmm.
playing my favorite song. Why do I feel so bad?
Right.
Why can I not be happy? And it's sort of devastating, right? Because you feel like it's taking from you.
Hmm.
You're not going to be able to get this moment back. You're not going to be able to say, okay, well, I'll try again tomorrow. The concert's not tomorrow. You substitute concert for whatever you want. Christmas morning, vacation with your family, an award ceremony for you or your kids or a loved one, just whatever it is, intellectually acknowledging that everybody else is happy, everybody else
Hmm.
is having fun, and you feel disconnected and alone. And you get really, I think people in general, we start to get really resentful because
Hmm.
why can't I be happy? Why do you get to be happy and I don't get to be happy? And then we start judging ourselves like, why can't I get this together? Why can't I figure it out? Why, even when I get exactly what I want, am I still miserable?
Hmm.
And then we start beating ourselves up. And then we start pushing people away because maybe we don't want to see their happiness. So now we're losing friends. Or maybe
Hmm.
we just stop going altogether. We're just like, well, if I'm going to be miserable, I might as well save the $300 on concert tickets. So now we've become isolated. And now we don't even have an opportunity to be happy because we cease to go to things. It's such a snowball effect of all these like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Hmm.
All of that is just so difficult to wrap your brain around. When should I push myself? When should I use self care? And I pick on influencers a lot, even though I technically am one. But so often it's like feeling down, go for a walk. Oh well, yeah, that's going to help serious and persistent mental illness.
You
But
totally get it. You totally
sometimes,
understand mental health
yeah,
problems.
but they are right. Sometimes you should go for a walk. Like
Hmm.
this is the hardest part about it. The advice isn't bad. It's just possibly bad for the person, right? It's like stretch before you exercise. But what if I have a gunshot wound? Then don't stretch. Go to the
Hmm.
doctor. It's not for you, right? But people think that it is for them.
Right.
I don't know. It's hard to come up with analogies, but if you're in the wrong mindset or if you're using advice that's not for you, and we
Right.
just lump all mental health together.
When you said that, it feels like we're trivializing. Like that's when my response to you, when the go for the walk is, we all think we have the answers and we have no
Yes.
idea what it's like. And it trivializes that person's experience when I say go for a walk, when you are barely able to get up in the morning.
One of the biggest problems that we have again is looking at this, mental health is one size fits all. We tend to take the person with schizophrenia, the person with bipolar disorder, the person with suicidal depression, and the person who's feeling disconnected or
Hmm.
down or anxious, and we lump them all in the same category and we give them all the same advice.
Right.
And could you imagine if hospitals did this? If you stub your toe or you have a heart attack, they give you the same treatment and they give you the same advice.
Hmm.
This would be terrible. And of course, the people with the stubbed toe would be fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they need the least, and chances are we're going to lowest common denominator this, especially since more people stub their toes and have heart attacks. But the problem is for all the heart attack people, they're out there like, you're not helping us, and this is leading to pain and suffering needlessly. This is leading to death. The problem is that all of the stub your toe people are like, well, it worked for me, so you're just a complainer. Well,
Sure.
it worked for me, so you're not trying. Well, it worked for me, you don't want to get better. Well, it worked for me, you're just not compliant. And we find ways to blame the people with mental illness for their own suffering, because after all, we told you to take a walk or to do yoga or to use fish oil or CBD oil or essential oils or nature bathe or whatever. We've given you all this nonsense that will absolutely help the blues or
Mm-hmm.
feeling down or low level anxiety. All of these things are normal human emotions. And things like smelling pretty things and going for a walk and connecting with people absolutely will alleviate basic anxiety and basic blues, but it's not going to do anything for bipolar disorder unless you're already healthy, and in which case, and meaning you're already in recovery with bipolar disorder. If you've got it well managed, then yes, because there's the other problem. People with bipolar disorder have normal moods too,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can have our bipolar disorder be perfectly in control and still be anxious. Not clinically anxious, just feel nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Our bipolar disorder can be very in control, and we can still have the blues or feel down or feel, it's raining, our friend canceled, and we're just like, this is a lackluster day. That's not mental illness. That's the kind of thing that, hey, refocus, go for a walk, and recharge your batteries. That's the kind of thing that self-care was designed for. But again, we lump it all together. Oh, you're having suicidal depression? Go for a walk. Oh, you're feeling sad that your baseball game got rained out? Go for a walk. Those need two wildly different approaches, but we've just got this one size fits all mentality.
Good, good, good. Good, good for everybody to hear that. Can you tell me about the psychosis part of bipolar? Not everybody goes into psychosis. I had a lot of students in psychosis from bipolar disorder. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So one of the potential symptoms of bipolar disorder is psychosis. You can experience hallucinations, delusions, visual or audio hallucinations. I had delusions. That was my experience with it.
Okay.
Delusions, for people who don't know, is you're positive something's there even though you can't see it. So I could not see or hear the demons that were under my bed, but I knew the demons were there.
Okay.
I was positive they were there. Another example I use is, if the refrigerator door is closed, you cannot see the food that's in there, but the food is in there. You have zero doubt the food is in there. So you make decisions based on that food that you cannot see. The difference is that if you open the door, you can see the food. If you look under the bed, the demons will not be there, but you've convinced yourself the demons, ran away because they knew you were looking and things like that. So you make decisions based on these delusions.
Hmm.
Not to be confused with, delusional gets thrown out a lot. It's like, oh, I'm going to be a star football player. You're delusional. You can't play football. No, that person's not delusional. They're just wrong. Delusion has a much higher threshold for when you are actually delusional. People who are delusional, they make decisions based on something that they don't have. So, for example, in the football analogy, that person would go out and buy the Ferrari, or tell people that they're going to get drafted next week and mean it. They're not hopeful. They honestly believe that they are this thing, even though they are very clearly not. They don't honestly believe that they can do it. They honestly believe that they have already done it. So that's a good distinction. But I don't want to say that it's rare. It's common, but it's not the majority of people. The majority of people with bipolar disorder do not have the psychosis component, but it's certainly possible. It's also possible, another caveat that is still being researched and still being sussed out is, where did the psychosis come from? Did the psychosis come from bipolar mania and being up for 3 days, 4 days? Bipolar mania makes it very difficult to sleep, and sleep psychosis is a real thing. If
Mhm.
you keep somebody up long enough, they will start to experience psychosis. from sleep deprivation. So
Right,
it's
right.
also possible that, mania is a driver. Obviously, it's always being studied, it's always being researched, and we're never quite 100% sure what is driving what.
So you brought up earlier on about what the effects can be for somebody with bipolar, like you get a mortgage for a house, etc. And I, until just this last year, had no understanding of the effects you could have when you are not well from bipolar. So my step cousin, what happened was he was in psychosis, diagnosed after that with bipolar. And you know what he did? He spent all of his
What?
money. He got kicked out of his apartment, right?
Yeah.
He lost his job, and this one had gone on for a while. And then he was institutionalized for a while. And my aunt gets a call, okay, you're ready to you pick him up. And no, I'm not picking him up because he was unsafe with me. And she said, this is how they go on the streets because he has walked through now. He's lost everything. He has no place to stay because he got kicked out of the apartment because he wasn't paying his rent and he was trashing the place, all of the financial repercussions of that. And luckily his brother agreed to take him. But this is how too it makes sense we see such homelessness after, because you've now lost everything. And if you don't have a family member or some lovely friend to pick up the pieces, you can ruin your life with no return. I had never ever recognized that until this situation.
Yeah, unfortunately, the societal safety net is not great. They say it's broken, but it's not broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to work.
Mm,
I don't know how that's broken. It's a bit like saying a car is broken because when you press this pedal, it stops. Well, that's the brake. It's working how it's supposed to.
mm,
But we love to say that the system is broken. The system is broken. The system's not broken. It works exactly how it's supposed to, exactly how it was designed. But it makes people feel better to think that it was an accident rather than something we did on purpose. But you're absolutely right. The reality is there's many people who become homeless because they run out of money and there's just no resources to support them. There's no case management. They need a higher level of care that can be provided. We have this general idea in our head that if people would just take their meds, they'd be fine.
mm,
I wish that was the case. I mean, if that was the case, we have long lasting injectables now. We have ways to forcibly medicate people.
mm,
I would just round everybody up and give them a shot in the butt of the medication, and then everybody would live happily ever after. It doesn't work.
mm,
It takes time for medication to work. It takes time for it takes time to see a doctor. There's just so many barriers to finding the medication, and finally, what's always left out of that, "Well, just take your medicine," is it's not actually med compliancy that we need. It's the correct medications that you're med
mm,
compliant on.
mhm.
And that takes time. And nobody really wants to acknowledge that. We just have this general belief that if you follow your doctor's orders, you'll live happily ever after. And it's not even that simple to see a doctor, let alone just follow what the doctors are gods. They just divine the perfect medicine cocktail for you and get it right, and then it works instantly. I mean, that's not how any illness really is. Not really, and certainly not complicated illnesses like severe and persistent mental illness. It's just fascinating to me, and it puts people with bipolar disorder and homelessness in such harm's way because we're just so comfortable just blaming them for their own problem.
Um, yeah, it's such a quandary. It feels like such a, I don't know, just a it's sad state of affairs of what we don't have for support, what we need for support, and the complexity of it. So I want to get into treatment, but first, I actually want to stop and talk about substance use that goes along with
Okay.
this, and then I want to hear about your treatment. You're candid about your substance use. Makes complete sense to me. We know that there's such a high correlation of mental health disorders with substance use. What did taking substances do for you?
So they did a couple of things, and in some ways I don't think that I'm unique, but in other ways I do think that I'm unique in the way that I think about my personal substance abuse. So the first thing that I always say is that I abuse drugs and alcohol. I never say that I was addicted to drugs and alcohol because I'm not sure what the mechanism there is,
Okay.
but once I got treated for bipolar disorder, the substance abuse cleared up relatively easily. I don't have the same stories of people who were fighting their addiction and would relapse, etc. I really believe that I was using drugs and alcohol for two primary reasons. The first reason is more understood, and that's that self-medication, right? Drinking slowed my brain down. Doing drugs slowed my brain down, especially when I was manic. I needed anything to distract me from the racing thoughts and from everything that was going through my head. Also, during the depression, things, certain drugs could elevate your mood even momentarily, and that was worth it. And so there was this idea of, if I did X, Y would follow, and Y was more desirable than the mood state that I was currently in. So that led to a lot of drug and alcohol abuse for me. But the second thing that did it is, I was up for days at a time, and you got to go back 20 years, 25 years. And if you wanted to be in the company of people at 2 a.m., there wasn't a lot of options. And the majority of those options involved drugs and alcohol. And the one thing that I remind people, especially the younger generation, is, all the way back in the 90s and early aughts, if you were around a bunch of people doing drugs and you wanted to stay, you had to do drugs too.
Right.
They did not want somebody who was not doing drugs to be around because they thought maybe you were a cop. They thought maybe you were a narc. They thought maybe you were up to no good. So in many ways, I also had to do drugs just to fit in with a group of people who were up at that time of night or who had a place to go for days at a time. Unfortunately, addiction, substance abuse, drug use, alcoholism, all of these things sort of followed people who quote unquote partied for days at a time. There really was no healthy, safe place to be around people for, 2, 3, 4, 5 days in a stretch that didn't involve just frankly a lot of illicit, illegal, and debaucherous activities. And I joined into all of them because I was there and because I wanted to fit in.
I've never heard that. That makes so much sense of a reason to get into substances. Because if you're up at 2 a.m, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? I
Exactly.
hadn't considered that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a part of the process, honestly. And I don't want to say that it's better now. I think that in some ways it is better now. I mean, certain drugs are legal. We have a different view of alcohol. Now if you say, hey, I'm sober or I'm not drinking, people are like, no problem. Back in my day, if you said, especially as a man, especially as a young man, oh, I'm not drinking. What are you, a wuss? Can I hold your purse? Can't hold your liquor. There was just much more of an expectation, at least in the circles I was in.
Right.
But I talked to many people who are my age, and I'm middle aged, and they're like, yeah. In my early days, alcohol, cigarette, they were everywhere. I mean, keep in mind for your younger listeners who are listening, this is back when you could smoke in a bar at 18.
Right.
Now in many states you have to be 21, and
Yeah.
indoor smoking bans are pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to recovery. I think it's so important for people to understand, like, this is what it takes and this is what works. Now, I think it's also universal for an adolescent, adult, older adult, correct? That the steps are going to be the same for every age group.
I don't know that the steps are going to be exact. I mean, they're kind of the same. I mean, depending on how far you pull out, the steps are the same. I mean, for everybody, it's going to be, medication, therapy, coping skills, and support. So yeah, it's completely the same there. But the closer you get to it, the more it dials in, right? It's
Yeah.
a good analogy is like cars. I mean, all cars are the same in that, they have a gas pedal, a brake pedal, and a steering wheel. But there's just a lot of difference between, a Ferrari and a 20-year-old beater that you bought off the street, right? In terms of the specifics, but in general, yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
For example, medications. So here
Yeah.
in Canada, Health Canada has medications up to 18. And then there's different, what's agreed upon and allowed for younger versus older. You're going to look at a different medication for a 40-year-old than a 17-year-old. So so medications are pretty much required, right?
There's controversy there. I
Okay.
want to make sure that we're telling your audience the truth.
Okay.
In my opinion, and the opinion of most experts, people with bipolar disorder, will do best on medication. They will thrive on medication. They will manage it on medication, and managing it without medication is nearly impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, there's always somebody out there who swears that they're managing bipolar disorder with zero medication.
Okay.
And you know, they may be, and maybe they'll be able to manage it for their lifetime. But for my money, no. If you have the accurate diagnosis of bipolar disorder, if you are truly living with bipolar disorder and weren't misdiagnosed for some other reason, the chances of you being able to manage it without medication is so remote that I am confident and comfortable saying you need it.
Right.
But I would be remiss if I didn't say that there's a whole bunch of people who are like, no, I saw a video and this guy's been fine for 3 years. And we can
Well,
certainly delve into why that exists, but I'm comfortable and confident to say you're going to be medicated the rest of your life.
I had several repeat students. I was the teacher on a psych unit, right? I had a small classroom at an inpatient concurrent disorder, so dual diagnoses of mental health and substance use. And you know, when they came back is when they stopped medication because they were doing okay. So they go off the meds, and then I see them like, good to see you again. Hi. Just the importance. And I think that's often, I know working with our early psychosis intervention is that there's this propensity to go, oh, I'm doing well, and go off meds. Or I've been told that some people like the psychosis. It's kind of nice to be in mania with psychosis. So they go off the meds because they want that back, is what his practitioners have told me that they've seen with clients.
The reality is mania feels good, and especially when you've gone through just long periods of feeling bad,
Totally.
any way to feel good is great. Now I point out that you know, abusing drugs and alcohol feels good. You know, overeating or overindulging makes you feel good, but there's a cost to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily worth it. I mean, a lot of the things that I did when I was manic felt good in the moment. They really did. They felt great. But the fallout lasted much longer than the happiness. I really do liken it to drug and alcohol abuse. I mean, I work with so many people on the substance abuse side, and, you know, they're going through withdrawal symptoms and they're suffering, and they're just like, look, if I just do X within 10 seconds, I'll feel better, and I'll feel better for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Why should I not do this? And I'm like, because you're going to feel bad for the rest of the week, and you're going to die young, and you're going to lose your job, and your kids aren't going to talk to you. And that's not a good trade. But they are right. They will feel good for a little while.
Yeah.
People who want the mania back are right. They will feel good for a little while, but it's not lasting goodness.
It works until it doesn't. I love that phrase. It works until, and all of that, taking the meds and off the meds, and it works until it doesn't. All right. I always do 3 wrap-up questions in terms of getting to the heart of the issue. I'm a teacher, so I wrap us back up, right?
Nice.
So here's number 1. What did you need as, I guess, a child? You said 10, 11 years old, and emerging as this came along through adolescence, from the adults around you as your bipolar disorder grew? What'd you need?
What I needed from them was to have more understanding, knowledge of the illness, because they had none. They were in the dark just like I was. And so they just reacted to everything that happened incorrectly. I'm really fond of using the analogy of the grease fire, right? People who know what to do when the grease fire breaks out on the stove, they simply get a lid, put it on it. I've seen my mother not even respond. It's like, you know, she's frying chicken up, a big flame bursts up, and my mom doesn't even hang up the phone. She just goes and gets the lid and sits it on it, and the fire goes out, right? But my parents didn't know what to do. So the fire burst out, which is a symptom of bipolar disorder, and they sprayed it with water, and it spread everywhere. It wasn't because they were bad. It wasn't because they were uncaring. It wasn't because they wanted to set the house on fire or hurt their son. It's because they didn't know. So I really needed the adults to understand that just because they didn't have any mental health issues, just because they didn't have mental illness, and just because they didn't think that mental illness was going to hurt them, I really wish that they would have just taken a moment to just be preventative. You know, I'm going to learn about this just in case.
Right.
And if they never would have needed it, that's great. But they did need it, and they didn't have it.
Gabe, you're kind of like a segue into my research findings, because you're saying exactly what the kids said in my research at the psych unit. It's one of the things that they desperately wanted. And I wrote this, and I do this in presentations, is that they know. We know they're not perfect, but we want them to have a general understanding of this and maybe go pursue it.
Yeah.
They said
Yeah.
that
We,
across
we
the
just,
board, we want them to know,
we just want
understand.
them to know stuff.
Hmm.
Look, we're learning this in other areas. The big example that I use is finally, after decades of what can only be viewed as sort of underlying misogyny, fathers are starting to learn about the menstrual cycle and the
Right.
facts of life for young women. This
Hmm.
was avoided like the plague,
Yeah.
but it left their daughters in not the best situation, right? It led to fathers saying ignorant things. It led to shame. It led to misunderstanding. And in the very odd or rare case of like divorce or death, where fathers are raising girls alone, they didn't know what to do
Hmm.
because they never learned it. We finally realized that this was a problem, and I use this as an example because the vast majority of people hearing this are like, many people hearing this, not the vast majority, but especially of a certain age is like, oh, that's disgusting. A certain age is like, well, they don't need to know that. A certain age is like, it's private. But now we're starting to see people's like, no, you need to know this. This is important. You want to
Hmm.
make sure that you're there for your child.
Totally.
And so we can see in the generations how that's evolved. And I think that's a really, really good thing. I think it's a powerful thing because I don't think that any of the fathers of the previous generations were trying to be dismissive. They
Hmm.
weren't trying to do these things. It was an unfortunate byproduct of misinformation and misunderstanding. And I want to see that in mental illness. I want to see that in mental
Totally.
health. And I think it will save a lot of
Yeah.
lives.
I worked with a lot of parents on that psych unit with their kids and students, my students. And you're reiterating too, what I always said is you have to become your child's advocate. Whether it's an
Yes,
older child, whether it's somebody, you're 80 years old and it's your 50-year-old child, but to become that advocate. And part of that is knowledge, right? With my daughter, I knew 3 years old, like something's going on. And I researched like once till 4 in the morning. I was up researching medication because we're the advocate. And that's for
exactly.
any age. Okay, here's my wrap up question number two
All
that kind
right.
of continues in. Okay, we're extending that parenting thing. I want to know your top 3 steps for a parent who has a child of any age, or it might be a close relative or a close friend. What do you do if you are concerned or you're watching emerging symptoms? What do you do in our system to access appropriate care and that we help our loved ones with bipolar?
So, first and foremost, if you suspect anything, get medical attention. For some reason in mental health, we believe that we have to be sure that something is wrong before we seek out the services of medical professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine if we had this in physical health? Like, oh, I think there's something wrong with my child. Well, what is it? I don't know. I'm just going to continue to observe until I figure it out.
Yep.
So like the rash keeps spreading. I don't know what that rash is, so I'm not going
Mhm.
to take him to the doctor until I can identify that rash. No, suspecting that something physically is wrong is enough to get you to take your child to a pediatrician, a general practitioner, or whomever. So I want to see the same thing in mental health. If you suspect something is wrong, make an appointment. You can start with your pediatrician. You can start with your general practitioner. If you suspect that it's more serious, or you're concerned that it's more serious, or you have the payer source, the insurance, etc., you can go straight to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner. Make whatever introduction into the medical field that you feel most comfortable with.
Mhm.
And then make sure you understand. And that's number one. Don't try to handle it on your own. There's so many advocates out there who are giving you the advice to manage your child's mental health by yourself. I think that's bad. I really do. You need to engage the services of professional
Mhm.
immediately at the highest level that you have the means and the access. I do acknowledge that somebody with great insurance is going to have
Yeah.
an easier time accessing care than somebody with no insurance. But absolutely access the highest level of care that you can. Write everything down and go in. The next thing is make sure you understand. If you think that something is wrong with your child and you go in and they're like, they're fine, that's just normal teenage stuff. Okay, explain to me why this is normal teenage stuff. And also,
Mm.
it's not normal teenage stuff because it's causing them distress. And I'm afraid that the reason that I'm here is because I feel that it's causing them a level of distress that is concerning to me.
Mm.
So if you don't get the answer that you want, because sometimes overworked pediatricians, general practitioners, health clinics, etc., they give you your kid's just a brat. First, I do want to say, be open to the idea that your kid is just a brat. We got to stop over pathologizing everything. You
Love
know,
it.
sometimes your kid does need
Totally.
boundaries and
Totally.
things like that. So just make sure you understand why your kid is a brat. Don't just take their word for it. Make sure you understand. So be open to the idea that nothing is wrong. Just because you suspect it doesn't make it true. So I'm not saying that only accept a diagnosis. That's ridiculous. Your child might not have anything wrong, but also don't accept just being, oh, it's fine. Okay, I need to understand why it's fine. And this is serious, right? Because this can lead to suicidality. This can lead to issues later in life. This can lead to eating disorders. This can lead to all kinds of things. So make sure you understand. And last but not least, because you said 3, and I've got a great third one,
Okay.
you need to understand going in that you're probably going to have to be tenacious. You are probably going to have to be persistent. You are probably going to have to be patient. This is not a quick fix. So many people, they're like, oh, I made an appointment with a psychiatrist. I went in, I talked to him for 5 minutes and it's fine now. And I'm always so suspect of that, no matter what the outcome is, right? If they're like, oh yeah, we talked to him for 5 minutes, they prescribed my daughter meds after 5 minutes, that's real quick.
Happens a lot.
And the reverse is also true. Oh, I talked to him for 5 minutes and I realized my son's just a brat.
I know.
Really? After 5 minutes? Like, no, this is, you might want a second opinion there. This is complicated. This is nuanced. This is serious. And I would remind all parents listening that, you know, mental health issues are diagnosed by observation. So if somebody's only looking at your kid for 5 minutes, they're not observing much.
And history, like the observation of the history. What were they like a year ago? What were they like 5 years ago? What were circumstances that led us up to this right now, to this moment? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Wrap up question.
Thank
Last
you.
question. Last question.
Last question. All right.
And this could be a 1-sentence answer. What is the
All
one
right.
thing, if you could have like a, I don't know, a big massive like blaring speaker in your car and like drive around the streets to blare out to everybody to know, what's the one thing that you would have society know about bipolar disorder so that our society becomes more understanding, more empathetic, and more supportive?
Bipolar disorder is absolutely treatable, and people with bipolar disorder thrive and accomplish all the time. You just don't see them because they have to hide because of stigma and discrimination. I mean, I would want to explain so much more, but there's so many people, there's so many people with bipolar disorder who are contributing on such high levels.
Yeah.
And they're able to do that because they got treatment, because they got therapy, because they learned coping skills, because they're managing their illness, but nobody sees them because they're smart to hide. Unfortunately, they are smart to hide.
And I think also creating boundaries. I've got a really good friend who has bipolar, and she has completely changed her life because she's like, I can't do this anymore. Too stressful before, totally revamped, and you can thrive. Like, I think that's the big hope there, right? It's the big hope is that you don't have to
everybody wants to thrive. People don't want to just get by. People don't just want to live. They want to live their best life.
Gabe Howard, thank you so much for taking on little old, like starting out right now me with your time about this. Your expertise is fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was so great talking to you.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for listening. Now, you can take action here. Share this video with somebody who needs to learn more about finding authentic connections in every way and who really needs to learn about building wellness. You can also find some episodes below and other content all about finding connection in every way.